Hello, this is Hervé from ComicBookBin, filling you in since 2002. So today we're going to be looking at the King's Features action figures from NECA. There's a mix of Defenders of the Earth and other King's Features version of the same characters. I've got a long history with each of them. Obviously, I watched the cartoon as a kid, but some of those characters were introduced to me way back as a kid, even before the cartoon I used to read Flash Gordon, archives of Flash Gordon comic strip as a kid. I used to borrow them from the library. So I've got a long history with all of those characters in comics, in cartoons, and now in action figures. In terms of action figures, for the most part, I've never had any of them as toys, but when they were introduced in the 2020 Toy Fair, along with the G.I. Joe Classified, this line of action figure, along with Classified, is what got me back to collecting action figures again. Now, in the case of the King's Feature characters, it took them a while before I got them. In fact, I only got the first set in the fall of 2022. I'm in Canada. It took a while before we got the first set. I didn't get the original Defenders of the Earth version and some of the other subsequent versions of the Phantom, Ming the Merciless, and Flash Gordon. I really wanted to get the King's Features version, the comic strip versions. That was a good decision in terms of quality. NECA toys, it did improve its quality of those toys over time. So the version that I got, the King's Features comic strip characters, are better made than the original Defenders of the Earth, the first wave. Now, there's only been one set for Mandrake and Lothar, and they're the Defenders of the Earth version. You could argue that Mandrake is a classic character, looks the same in any version he would be released at. He's basically your stock magician. He could also be used for as a Terra action figure. As for Lothar, he looks nothing like the comic strip version. He looks like the Defenders of the Earth version, which is more action oriented, and looks a bit more like a G.I. Joe Classified or a simplified G.I. Joe Classified than anything from the comic strips. And that's okay. That's okay. I like him just the way he is also. I'm happy that I got the original Phantom. By that I mean not the first version that was released by NECA, but this version with the stripes on the wear, which is more purplish, with the skull, the whip. So this version is the version we would have seen in the comic strip. I'm also happy to have gotten the original Flash Gordon, again the comic strip Flash Gordon, which is based more on Alex Raymond's depiction than anything else. Flash Gordon would be the oldest character of them all, having been released in comic strip form in January 1934. Ming came a few weeks later in the strips, in the Flash Gordon strip. Flash Gordon was obviously a clone or King's Features version of Buck Rogers, the spacefaring action hero, but quickly overtook his inspiration, had a life of his own, adventures of his own, and the one thing that we can celebrate about Flash Gordon is that this character is the original fantasy science fiction type of character. By that I mean that he mixes fantasy element with super technological worlds. This is something that He-Man does a lot. There's other series, other characters that do the same too. But Flash Gordon is the original model for worlds that are inhabited by weird creatures, fantastic settings, dragons even, monsters, creatures, but also science fiction-ish weapons, and so on. I hear some of you mentioning John Carter of Mars. Now, Flash Gordon has always been a successful character in comic strips, even though there's no new adventures of him published today. The figure looks like the classic Flash Gordon character, but his features are based on Buster Crabbe. You can see this in the high arch eyebrows that he has. This is Buster Crabbe's signature feature. At first, I thought that Flash Gordon was based off Tab Hunter. He does look like him too, but it's really Buster Crabbe. If you go back and look at Buster Crabbe pictures, you'll see that their sculptors at NECA really base their characters off him. Now, the body itself that he uses is a standard superhero body that was probably used with Green Lantern and Batman and even Superman figures from NECA a few years ago. I can't say exactly for sure since I don't have them, but I've seen enough to say that this is a standard body that's been used before. One thing that we need to notice is that this Flash Gordon is much shorter than the original Defenders of the Earth version, which is a bit taller. I prefer this shorter version of Flash Gordon as it fits better overall with regular 1/10 action figure or 7-inch action figures than the bigger ones that we tend to see today. He might even fit a little bit with 1/12 action figures such as G.I. Joe Classified and some Marvel Legends to some extent, while some characters such as War Duke towers over Flash Gordon still look good with him because War Duke is a bit of a fantastical warrior, not a regular human being like Flash Gordon. Flash Gordon is the typical action hero, shoot first, adventure, save the damsel in distress. That's who he is. The look that he has here looks a bit weird. It's not exactly what I would call superhero fashion, number one. He's not a superhero either. He's an adventurer in this case. More like a pulp hero or something in between, a pulp hero and a superhero. Articulations at the neck are very good. Obviously twist a 360, look down, look up, but also sideways. Tilt sideways pretty well. He comes with two different heads, one with the face harness, one without, with just the face, the head, which means that you can reuse that extra head if you have extra bodies of other figures, army builders. You can use that extra head, although the scale will be a bit bigger for most 1/12 action figures. If you have army builders in 1/10 scale, they'll fit for that. This particular sculpt has those medallion things around his neck. This is a feature from the comic, so this is not a surprise. He also sports the thick belt. That thick belt doesn't look good in 2023, but this was something back then as a pop character, so the original Alex Raymond character did have such a thing around his belt. But the way NECA used it here is that they made it easy to just plug in his ray gun holster and his sword, so there's no actual pins inside of his waist. So it's very good to have this kind of gaudy belt around him. The colors are simple. The boots are kind of brown grayish. There's kind of a gold stripe on the side of his thighs, legs, and so on. The paint coverage is not very good, so you can actually see underneath. Could be better. There is some shading across the body, but the good thing here of this version of Flash Gordon compared to the other ones NECA released before is that the skin tone is the original plastic color, which means if you want to exchange Flash Gordon's hands, he has about 6 pairs of hands that you can use to hold his sword and gun. You can exchange those without having the paint on the peg of the hands just chipping away. The original version had painted plastic, which meant that the paint would chip from the figure. It's not great quality. I waited for this version for several years because I knew this version had that fix. NECA has learned a lot and tried to improve a lot about the figures that it's doing right now, and that's a good thing. I like that. They did good work on that. It's got an ab crunch. It's kind of stuck in a way. In my version of the figure, I put him one peg below, but you can also put him one peg up. So there is a ratchet. If you keep it at the top ratchet, this is how he came in the box. It might look like he's humping a bit. If you raise it to the top ratchet, it's a bit better for the figure. He doesn't have a ball joint at the waist, but he can still twist around a bit. He's very stiff. I did dunk the figure in hot water. It helped a bit. I was also very afraid because NECA action figures are known to break. Many collectors broke the first version of their Flash Gordon figures, the Defenders of the Earth version. They broke the pegs at the arm. Some wrist pegs were broken also. Sometimes it was the arms. Those are easy to break. NECA really improved the quality here. I can't complain, and I'm not going to complain. This is a better product than we've had before. The figure can do a split, not perfect. I would say around 80 degrees. He does have exposed double joint knees. Again, they're stiff. He does have curls at the shin guards or the calves. The thighs can twist a bit, but the articulation is a ball joint inside the hip, so he can turn his thighs a bit, but not a full 360, as if it was just a curl cut. You can raise his shoulders to about, I would say, 75 to 80 degrees, so not a T-pause. Very difficult to have him achieve that. He can turn his shoulders, obviously, a full 360. He doesn't have any butterflies inside of his shoulder articulation, so he can bring them together. He does have double joints at the elbows. They work quite well. The sculpt in that area is not the best looking. Feels like there's a gap, but it works best when the elbows are bent. It's the inside type of wrist articulation, so it's not the best one to hold and wield weapons like guns and swords. So this is Flash Gordon. Obviously, all of the Defenders of the Earth action figures have the same toe crunch. all of them. The gun, the ray gun, goes inside the socket. There is a pin on the socket, like a leathery type. It does shut over the ray gun. Some people might find that it's a bit difficult to shut down the harness on top of the ray gun. The sword is very nice. It's kind of plain and it's clean, and the sheath that comes with the sword is gorgeous. The sword just fits inside. Unlike Ming, there's no chain in it. The gold used there is thicker. It's a much better quality, and the sword will fit completely inside. One thing I will say, the pegs in the wrist are a bit loose, so you're not going to get something that grips the figure tightly when you put things or when you try to twist them. It might be for the better, because past NECA action figures had problems if you wanted to exchange the hands. Now, I haven't had any problem changing the hands nor changing the head. I was afraid that the ball joint might be stuck, that I might even break the ball joint at the neck. It's actually fairly easy to change that. It's a good figure. It's easy to pause also. It's not the tallest of the Defenders, but it's the same articulation for all of them. Next, we have Ming, the Merciless. Ming comes with two different heads and a cape. The cape is flimsy and cheap, feels like nylon. There's no wire in the cape, unlike Mandrake. Now, there's several versions of Ming that were released, so I'm not the world's expert on the different Flash Gordons and the different Ming, the Merciless characters. I know that there's version for the 1979-1980 film. There's also the Film Vision cartoon version. Then there is the Defenders of the Earth version. And in the case of both Ming and Flash Gordon, they all have the same basic sculpt, heads, hands, and so on. It's the same sculpt reused with different deco for each version of the character. So far, I'm keeping from the comic strip the version with the helmet on. That's the one that came with the figure anyway, attached. I'm not using the ray gun very much. It's the same ray gun that's used with Flash Gordon. Ming came with golden hands, but you can switch those hands with there's different sets of them to hold the weapons in his hands. I find that it's very difficult to try to put the sword inside of his hand, and unfortunately, I broke or detached one of the sword socket from the base of the handle of the sword. It's easy to put it back, but you can tell that it was glued, and the glue was not very solid. I'll have to re-glue it myself to fix that. So this is the famous NECA break, that it just breaks on you. In this case, it's not an articulation or a limb that broke on me. It's a sword, so it's not as bad. It doesn't matter as much. The sword sheath looks gorgeous. It has a metal chain on it, unlike Flash. Obviously, Ming sports the same thick belt, and the peg holes for the sword sheath and the ray gun's holster are the exact same spot as Flash Gordon. This version of Ming has a thick collar around his neck and a contraption that attaches the cape to the base of his shoulders. His hands are nice. They're very well sculpted. They have huge nails and he looks creepy, but this is Ming and that's okay. You'll notice that this Ming figure does not look like the Yellow Scare anymore. Ming was one of those characters that looked like Fu Manchu and the Yellow Fear before the Second World War. I'm glad that this was cleaned up here. The articulation for Ming is the exact same one as Flash Gordon, so I'm not going to go over it. I will say that his articulations are a bit tighter. I've got problems bending his elbows, and I don't want to push them too hard because I know that they can break. This is still a NECA toy. You have to be very careful with them. If you see that there's resistance, you need to stop before you break something. If I really want to bend his elbow, I'll dunk him in water. Well, dunking him in water is a problem because you can't put the entire figure. You don't want to because he has a cape. So you want to be careful with that. The two articulation on Ming is extremely loose, which means it doesn't support the body in every case. So Ming tends to be, all of them, they tend to be top heavy. So if you're looking for good support when you're pausing the figure, that might be a problem for you. The parts on Ming are almost exactly the same as Flash Gordon. So those figures, they tend to have something like what I would call some kind of diaper underwear around the actual plastic, which is more rubbery. So when you raise the legs, it feels a bit more like a bendy feature. McFarlane's also use that. I will say that NECA's version of this feature is probably a bit better than McFarlane. The figures do have curls at the shins, the calves, and with raised boots. A bit stiff, but it works. The knees are also stiff. I'm always afraid of bending them, but they do bend a bit. Again, Ming is the type of figure that you want to dunk in water before you do anything with him if you don't want to break your figure. These are still expensive action figures compared to other lines, so you don't want to break them, and they're not quite as easy to get, especially if, like me, you're in Canada. Not every vendor had them. I had to wait for a local Canadian vendor to have them before I even got my shipment. Ming's looks are menacing. I like the figure. He's a good fighter. I didn't get his henchmen from the Defenders line, but I've got more than enough creepy creatures over there from Mythic Legion and other lines to serve as henchmen for Ming when he's fighting Flash Gordon and the other Defenders. So I'm good for now. The other character, in terms of chronology, that I'm going to be looking at is Mandrake, the Magician. Mandrake is a special character. There is an article at ComicBookBin that I wrote last year if you want to know more about the character's history, because it is fascinating. Mandrake was actually a real person. A Canadian stage magician was called Mandrake and appeared just a few years before the Mandrake from the comics. So this is fascinating. Now the real Mandrake never sued and actually worked with Lothar, the creator of this Mandrake, the action figure, the fictional character, and they look the same. Go read that article at ComicBookBin. It's fascinating. There was also a museum exhibition in Vancouver a few years ago on the original Mandrake, the Canadian Mandrake. The exhibition has ended, but you can probably see the website of the exhibition with some of the material from the actual real-life Mandrake mixed in with some of the comic strip character material. This is fascinating. The one thing I will say about Mandrake is that the hat cannot be removed. This is something I wish they would have given us two heads for. Since they've given us two heads for other characters like Flash and Ming, they probably could have given us two heads for Mandrake so that we could exchange the head. I don't know if they're going to do another version of Mandrake. If they do, I hope that they give us a clean head and a head with the top hat. The Mandrake figure can be used for so many other characters in your collection, such as obviously Zatanna's father. Mandrake is the character that many other magic characters were based on, including Zatanna, Dr. Okel, and obviously Doctor Strange. Yes, Doctor Strange would be a Mandrake type character. It's fascinating when you look at the history of comics to look at the original. Some people have said that the Defenders of the Earth were the original MCU in the sense of a shared universe on screen. I would say that probably DC beat them to that a few years later, but it's true that several properties which never really crossed comics were joined in the Defenders of the Earth cartoon. I was afraid that NECA's Mandrake was going to be a resculpt of some of their movie Dracula version, and it's not. It seems like an original sculpt. Mandrake comes with a ray gun because he is a Defenders of the Earth. It's kind of weird because I don't recall seeing him with any ray gun in that cartoon, but I don't believe I watched all of those episodes, so maybe I don't recall. It's been a while. The neck looks a bit high on the body. This is something you can't quite notice because of the high collar, but it is a long neck, and if you were to detach that collar, you would see that the head is standing very high here. But unless they had reduced the space of the collar, made it a bit shorter so that the head could go deeper inside the body, that's why it looks like that. Mandrake uses an overlay, kind of a rubbery plastic overlay on top of a regular body on the knee. I don't know what kind of body they gave him on the knee, though it's form-fitting. When I compare him with my Kato action figure, who also wears a suit, Kato's suit is not form-fitting even though it's an overlay. In the case of Mandrake, it is an overlay, but it's form-fitting. But at the same time, Mandrake does not have any ab crunch that you can use. Well, maybe he does, but you can't quite use them. Well, I'm trying trying to see, and no, I can't. There's none. Again, just like the other figures, you can do the split. The crotch area is again that overlay, that rubbery plastic overlay. In terms of the skull, the special articulations at the elbow are not nice looking. The reason is that NECA tried to give us a double articulation on a character wearing sleeves of a suit. So it's got this weird contraption and it does not look good at all. And now for the knees, they gave us single articulation for the knees, it seems. And they did that knee pointing thing to not break the ridge of the pants. So it looks good when the character is standing up, but it does not look good when you bend his knees. I think the Kato action figure did it better, even though in his case, he does have double knee articulation. There's no break. Mandrake comes with his staff with a diamond on top, classic Mandrake. Now I'm not going to use Mandrake's ray gun. I gave his ray gun to Lothar. Mandrake shoes are good looking. They're dress shoes. I like them a lot. But the paint covering them is not thick enough, so you can see the black underneath. You can't see it, but it could have used a few more coats. Now, Lothar is a special character in the sense that he was a sidekick for most of his life, but nowadays could be considered the first black superhero before Black Panther and other independent characters, or one of the first ones. He appeared right away in Mandrake's comic strip. I don't have the archives in front of me, but some people have claimed that he even appeared before Mandrake in the actual strip. This version of Lothar is the classic Defenders of the Earth with a jacket, a lot of gear, reminds me of Alpine and Roadblock at the same time. He's kind of built just like a classic G.I. Joe classified figure, so he does have a knife that you can remove from a holster on his jacket. Comes with a backpack, but the backpack is glued in with the rest of the jacket. You can remove the jacket. Now, I haven't tried to remove the jacket. The problem I find when you look at the character without the jacket is that his waist is too thin. He should be a very thick kind of guy and not have a wasp type of abs and waist. It should be a bit wider. So I'd rather keep the jacket on him because it gives him the impression of being thicker and wider. I prefer that for this character. There are many straps all over his body. There is a holster for you to put his ray gun. There are ropes called pin on the jacket. Those look very nice, by the way. There's also another rope that comes with him with a hook, and that hook can open up. It's a bit interesting. Well, you can open it up and also extend it. It looks like the hook that came with another NECA action figure a few years ago, Nathan Drake, but it's much better in the sense that you can extend the grappling hook and open them. It is made of real lace type material. Technically, your Lothar could be hanging from this hook. This is a cool feature. I don't like Lothar's face. It doesn't look like anything like in the cartoon. It looks like they took Flash Gordon's face and try to make him black, but exaggerate the features. But I guess some people have to be ugly. He's ugly. The overlay on his chest with the Defenders of the Earth logo, which is actually the Flash logo, is glued in. So he has the standard superhero body that all the other characters have, even though he's much bigger in the cartoon, much stronger than them in the cartoon. But that's okay. Like I said, with the jacket, he looks a bit beefier. And he does look a bit taller than the other character, just a bit. If you compare him, obviously, with the King's Features version, not the original Defenders of the Earth, Flash Gordon. He's got kind of weird knees in terms of the sculpt because they put some knee pads and it feels like, I don't know, like his knees are kind of bent or something. So that doesn't quite look good on him. And the figure will fall often. He's extremely top heavy, especially with his backpack. It's an extremely top heavy figure. And even though the toe articulation is very stable, he does have very narrow ankles. So the support will not be as good. But there are obviously double articulation at the knees. Also the shins and the calves. Double articulations at the elbows. You can't raise his arms very much. I would say no more than 50 degrees, both arms. But you can attach his rope around his arm, which is what I did here, to give him a sense that he's using his gear here. I like that about the figure. Obviously, everybody likes when their figure can hold all of their equipment on themselves. Like I said, I'm giving him Mandrake's gun. I don't think Mandrake needs a ray gun. It doesn't work with a magician, but I guess they gave him one. NECA reused the same or almost the same fire effect effects for the ray gun. That's okay. You can just plug that in the turret. So there is the flash one and there is the extended one where he hits a target. It's a good one. Mandrake is a good figure. And finally, we have the Phantom. The Phantom is the more recent characters of them all. He's just a few years before Superman, but the Phantom would be one of the first masked superhero. So he's really like the bridge between the pulp characters, just like the other Defenders, but also the superhero, more than any of them. He does wear a mask and is strong on the outside. This is a classic superhero trope. The Phantom is also kind of like Tarzan, but also like Wolverine and Batman. So he's got that mysterious beast-like, cat-like feature. I'm thinking about getting a second Snake Eyes with a white timber so I can give it to the Phantom, although I do have one from Michaels. Any white creature, animal will look good with the Phantom because that's kind of his thing. So that should look good with him. So the Phantom has a classic mask head. It seems like it's the exact same sculpt as the other figure that was released with the Defenders of the Earth, but a bit just like Flash, a bit shorter than the other one. And obviously, it's the base plastic was used for the hands also, which means that it's more solid and it doesn't chip away any kind of paint when you try to extract the hand from the wrist. Phantom comes with two guns. They're not ray gun. There is classic Phantom weapons. He's got a ring on both hands. On his right hand, it's to warn someone that he's helping them. On his left hand, it's to warn someone that he's gonna beef with you. I like the face painting on the Phantom. The original plastic is a skin color. It's a very pulpy and simple mask, but it's effective. He's really the superhero archetype here. He's got a belt of softer PVC rubber-like material. He also wears a diaper stuck on the outside, just like the other characters. Except, like I mentioned, with this guy, it's an overlay on top of the plastic underneath. It works well for those characters. I don't like them in McFarlane figures, but I believe NECA did a better job of creating those overlays for the trunks. In terms of articulation, the Phantom has great head articulation. You can make him look up, down, turn 360, but also a good side to side. Well, each of those NECA figures have the same feature. They each look very good for that. That's one good thing about those figures. Again, it is a NECA toy, so be careful when you try to articulate him. Mine seems okay thus far, but you never know with NECA toys. For the Phantom, I believe this version is the best version of the Phantom that NECA did. The original from the Defenders of the Earth came with a pet. That's not what I'm really interested in. This one comes with the original skull of the original Kit Walker from way back, the first man that was murdered. Each generation of Kit Walker since the death of the original swore to defend and uphold justice in memory of the original. So it's cool for that. It's a kind of prop that you can use in a different setting, just like in Dr. Mindbender's lab if you want. The NECA figures, those King's Features characters, are a bit taller than your 112 figures. They're 110 figures. But they will look good with any other 110 set, even those that are a bit larger, also from NECA, like War Duke, but also with characters such as the Mythic Legion. Although the Mythic Legions are a bit wider, even the X-Rays combatants are thicker and wider and bigger. I understand these characters are not for everybody, and the early quality problems that NECA had with the first set of Defenders of the Earth probably discouraged many people from collecting those. But the latest version, the King's Features, got better. The King's Features version of Flash, Ming, and the Phantom are the right version to get if you're really into those characters. As for Mandrake and Lothar, they got better too. I'm glad that we have those characters in action figure form. Boss Fight does have some of those characters too, but they're 4 inches figures. I'd rather get obviously 110 figures instead. I recommend all of those guys, but it's up to you. If you're not into those characters, you can skip them, and if you can still find them in stores. So this is Hervé from ComicBookBin, filling you in since 2002. Like and subscribe.